Welcome everyone to Writing for Your Life. Our online conference is Author Platform Development through Social Media. My name is Brian Elaine, and I produce the Writing for Your Life workshops. I'm also honored to serve as director of the Frederick Buechner Center. So today's presentation is titled Starting from Scratch on Your Author Platform, and it features Philip Zoutendam, who is Digital Content Specialist at Erdmann's Publishing. So if you'd like to ask questions during the presentation, feel free to do so over in the chat box on the right, and we'll get to them either during the presentation or at the end of the presentation. So let me turn it over to Philip, and we will get going.
So I'm Philip Zoutendam. I work here at Erdmann's Publishing in Grand Rapids. We're kind of a mid-size independent Christian publisher that publishes across a pretty wide spectrum. We publish everything from super nerdy academic texts about pseudepigrapha and apocrypha to trade spirituality titles. So some notable authors in the past on our list have been people like Eugene Peterson, Marilyn McIntyre, who I know has presented at some of these conferences. And we've got, I think, an exciting slate of new and upcoming authors coming out soon as well. So because we're a smaller publisher, we work in the same city as publishers like Zoutendam, which are part of HarperCollins Christian, tend to be big. We often work with a certain type of author in spirituality and a certain type of platform, honestly, that comes to us. And so it made sense to focus on starting from scratch. Many of our authors are newer, they're upcoming, or up and coming, as I mentioned, and still kind of figuring out their platform, or they're learning to expand their platform. And so I just thought I would share some of the insights that I've developed from working with them and some of the suggestions that I give to our in-house authors as well. I'm calling this Starting from Scratch, and this is a good news, bad news scenario. So there's good news, there's bad news, and I'll start with the bad news first. Most of the authors that I work with, if they're writing in spirituality, they tend to be a little bit more introverted, thoughtful, and that really produces some excellent writing. But that also means that if you're an introvert, you probably really don't want to spend a lot of your time on social media, on the internet. You want to write, you want to think, you want to have smaller conversations that feed into your work. But you really still have to do this if you want to get published. In one of his presentations, Brian mentions some of the ways that the book publishing industry has changed a little bit, or actually a lot. I'm newer in publishing. I started at Erdmann's a couple of years ago. And I think I really came into the industry when some of these changes were really kind of being firmly established. And that's that you really have to have a platform if you are a new author. It used to be, from what I can tell, that if you knew the right people that could recommend your book and said, yeah, this is a great publisher, publishers would take it, say, yeah, we're going to publish this. They would send out copies to the major journals that would publish reviews. Consumers bought the journals, read the reviews, said, yeah, I'll take their word on this. I'm going to buy this book. And that is just really not how, at least for new and up-and-coming authors, the system works on the whole. There are always exceptions, and there may be good reasons why you might be an exception, and there's no reason to focus on platform to the exclusion of building human connections and looking for good reviews. But platform is really an essential thing that we evaluate when manuscripts come in, when we're trying to acquire a manuscript. And it's something that I think is standard across the industry. You've got to have something that shows up on Google. You've got to have some place where people can find you on social media to figure out what you're about, and for you to share and to take advantage of some of that kind of exponential or kind of viral sharing, even if it's on a smaller scale, you really need those networks. And so you've got to have something that you're contributing to those networks. You've got to have something that's visible on those networks. So the bad news is, if you don't want to do this, you still have to do this. But of course, that doesn't mean there's not good news. So we'll talk about the good news a little bit. Cycle through this. So the good news is, of course, that you can actually build a platform from scratch, and you can do it without making yourself miserable, and you can do it without selling your soul. The thing about social media is that there really is a social element to it. And so that if you're doing it right, and you work on it, and you find your rhythm, and you find the right place for you, you find things that are natural, social media really is going to be social for you. It's not going to be automatic necessarily. If you're really starting from scratch, there's going to be some trial and error. There's going to be some experimentation. There will probably be times when you're working really hard to publish things and to build your platform, and it just doesn't seem like anybody's finding your platform or reading your platform. That's okay. The good news is you'll find your rhythm as long as you go about doing it in the right way. So I think it's important to talk about what your platform is. I just like to talk about platform as a place for you to say interesting things about something you care about. I think it's really important to be clear about what platform is not. Platform is not you. It's not the totality of what you do as a writer. It's not where you start as a writer, and it's not where you're going as a writer. It's not a primary thing. It's not an end in itself. It is very much secondary, and it's a means to the end. The heart of what you're doing, the real core of your spirituality and your writing, those are your primary things. And your platform is where you express those, and it's a tool that you use to share what you're writing and share what you're thinking with the world, and ultimately, in some ways, and ideally, to get to publishing a book. So it's a means to those things, but it's not the primary thing. So if you're starting from scratch with the platform, but you're still starting with the platform instead of starting with good writing disciplines, good spiritual disciplines, it's going to be kind of a spiral. It's going to be, in some ways, a trap for you. So it's important to remember that it's a secondary thing. And it's an expression of what you're already doing. So it's a place for you to say interesting things about something you care about. That means that you've got to have something that you care about. And that means that you need to be saying those interesting things and not just saying anything, not just saying things for the sake of it. You really want your content to be rich and rewarding for people that are reading it. So let's talk a little bit about some of the goals that you should have when you're building your platform. I've just gone down a list here and asked some basic questions: who, what, where, and how often, and why. I think your goals that match up with these questions are personality, simplicity, quality, consistency, and all of those things leading ultimately to visibility. That's the why that you're doing this. It's to share those thoughts, those interesting thoughts that you have, and to share those with people that want to read them. So it's important to remember, with that in mind, that your goal is not numerical. Your goal isn't stat counting, and Lord knows you can count stats on every single element of your platform now, from your blog or your website to all the social media. You can run analytics till you're crazy. That's not your goal. Your goal is the people that those analytics and those stats represent. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that visibility is about people and not about numbers. So let's start with personality. This is the who question. And I think with personality, you've got to figure out what your thing is. And I think it's important to say that your thing is not X. It's not one thing. It's X plus Y. It is something plus something else. It's spirituality through the lens of something else. It's prayer through the lens of something else, or in particular contexts. It's community through a certain experience that you had. This is your personality, and this is something that applies to both your platform and whatever book that you're going to be writing and submitting and trying to get published. Especially when you're starting out, you've got to spend some time figuring out what your unique angle is. It's an X plus Y, it's not X. So I want to start with a particular example of an author that we've published a book from in the last year that's done very well. Her book has caught a lot of people's attention internationally, actually. So Gisela Kreglinger wrote a spirituality book. And so, of course, it has this spirituality element. But that wasn't the only thing, and that's not why we published it. We published it because of her unique angle, which in her case is wine. So her book is The Spirituality of Wine. And the way that she brings a unique angle to this really comes a lot out of her family history, her biography. Gisela grew up in a wine or a vineyard owning family in Germany. She grew up on a vineyard that dates back to the 15th or the 16th century. So she grew up around wine. And she grew up in a European culture that approached wine and alcohol in a very different way than a lot of American Christians do, or at least have in the past. So she tells a wonderful story in the introduction or the preface to that book about taking her first communion at her local Lutheran parish and realizing that the wine that she was drinking in that first communion was wine that had come from her family's vineyard. So the work and the craft and ultimately the wine, the alcohol that her family produced, was intimately connected not only with the cultural life, but the spiritual life of her community, of her family. And so Gisela, grew up and eventually got into theology, studied at St. Andrews in the UK, got a doctorate, and was kind of thinking about what her work was going to be and what angle she was going to take. And she was surprised to find in some teaching appointments in the US and in the South how many American Christians specifically had a real aversion to wine and to alcohol. And so out of this was born her project of exploring the spirituality of wine in Scripture. So the book brings into focus issues and questions of craft, of eco-culture, of sin, of virtue and vice, of temperance versus exorbitance, and of community versus isolation. Those are all themes that might appear in many different spirituality books, but her angle was spirituality and wine. So this was her personality. It was X plus Y. A number of other great examples of this that are really notable in the last 5 or so years. Books about spirituality and prayer and hospitality and baking, things like that. I'm not recommending that you choose one of those. Much of that has already been done. You may have a particular angle on that. But another book that came to mind that we'll be publishing within the next year or so is a book that is titled Adoption, the Sacrament of Belonging in a Fractured World. So it's a book about community, but through the lens of someone who herself was adopted. And so she brings all the insights that she has as an adopted person, as someone that's been welcomed into community by other people. And and starts to relate that to Christian community and what it looks like and how there are similarities and also important differences. That's an X plus Y. Community through the lens of adoption, not just a book about community. So again, these are ideas that you want to keep in mind when you're pitching and shaping your book. And it's equally true, you've got to keep this in mind when you're building your platform. So the posts that you make, the blog posts, the tweets, the social media posts, you want to keep in mind that they should be reflecting this interest, not just spirituality or prayer, but the spirituality of something else. So that's personality. Next, I want to talk a little bit about simplicity. With your platform, you've got to start somewhere, but you really can't be everywhere. So with people that are starting from scratch, and sometimes people that already have a platform and are looking to streamline it, I really recommend a pick two philosophy. And this can be built on, but this is really what I recommend. I recommend a combination of longer form and shorter form for simplicity. So I recommend that authors starting out, or prospective authors, hopeful authors starting out with their new platform, choose some kind of long form medium. And that's, I think, usually either a blog or a website. Although some people, and actually our editor-in-chief, James Ernest, is one of the people that tend to do longer form posts on Facebook. That's not, I think, what I recommend for most people, but some people find that it's a natural fit for them. I really recommend a blog or a website for longer form posts. And those end up getting shared on shorter form posts. But this also can be a kind of stable position for you, both in Google search results and in the internet landscape. So social media can be a little bit volatile. Things change really quickly. Blogs and websites are a little bit more stable. And this is the place where you're really going to connect with, ideally, the writing disciplines that you've already built or that you're building. You should be writing consistently. And this is a place for you to share those, whether they're sketches or rough drafts or complete articles or book reviews, again, that are shaped in some way by your personality, by your X plus Y. This is a place for you to post those so that people can get a sense of what you're about, and can get a sense of your voice as a writer. We'll talk a little bit about consistency in a moment here. Blogs and websites can be something of a pitfall if you're not consistent with them. But if you are, and again, if this is attached to your consistent writing disciplines, blogs or websites are a good place to host those forms. Another thing about this is it's become easier and easier to create on your own by your own means, or with the help of with simple help from a friend, from a student, from a child or a nephew or something like that. We've had some authors work with younger people and their family to create a good-looking blog or website. It's not hard to make something that looks good, and the more professional this home, this longer form home for your content is, the easier it is to mitigate, in a way, the fact that you might be new and relatively unknown. So if you've got, a good website or a good blog that shows up on Google searches and people click to that, they might not know how unknown you are. As long as it looks good and it's got regular content, that's what's going to draw people in and really push them to your writing without them asking the question, should I be listening to this person? They're going to find it natural to say, yeah, this person looks like they've got good things to say. So that's long form. I recommend picking one of those two, and often your website's going to include something of a blog. And then I recommend starting with one short form. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and whatever else the kids are using these days. And I say that as somebody who works in social media. It's hard to keep up with stuff. So the short form, the landscape may change over the next 5 or 10 years. Almost certainly it will. I recommend choosing one of those three at the top, though. And honestly, I lean heavily towards Twitter, although some people lean towards Facebook. I lean towards Twitter as a place for short form. So what are you doing in your short form? You're also expressing your personality here. You're saying interesting things about something you care about. And you're also using this medium to share those longer form things that you've posted on your blog or your website. Facebook and Twitter are very good places to share links. They've got natural image grabbing, media grabbing functions now. It's really easy to share images. It's really easy to link people to longer form content. That's why I recommend having or one of the features that I recommend for a shorter form medium. The reason that I lean towards Twitter so heavily is I think that, at least among the authors that we know and follow, Twitter is the most social of the social media. People get into conversations there with other notable people. In some ways, Twitter clarifies one of the problems that Facebook sometimes has, which is that you can have a personal page and an author page, and you feel like you kind of have to do double duty. You have to figure out which is going to go on which page, and your audience members don't know, are they interacting with you or somebody else? Your family members don't know, who they're interacting with if they're on your author page, something like that. Twitter is just, it's all collected into one. You've only got one Twitter account, and that's you. And you're accessible to everyone in the same ways on Twitter. There's not quite the ambiguity of Facebook. Also, importantly, you're accessible, or other authors are accessible to you on Twitter, I think a little bit more easily as well. I see more conversations happening between authors on Twitter than I do on Facebook. So that's really why I recommend Twitter as a good starting place. Let's talk a little bit about quality and what it is that you're going to be posting on your platform. So I think it's really important to say that quality doesn't necessarily mean long-winded. And so when we're talking a little bit about shorter form things, I'll just use this tweet by Rachel Held Evans as an example. I know she's presenting later in the conference. She's really active across many media. She's a great example of somebody whose platform is incredibly robust. As you can see on the stats of this particular tweet, I thought this was a good example of a quality tweet. It's provocative. It's not unkind. It's short, and it makes its point pretty clearly. It's not long-winded. It's short and it's pithy. But this gives you a good idea of what Rachel Held Evans is doing. And of course, this has all sorts of political connections, and it's pretty tough to find examples from the last week or so of people posting things that are not political. But so this refers, this is her talking to two different groups, people from the Women's March and people from the March for Life, groups that she has some affinity to, I think, in both cases. And this is kind of part of her personality. She's talking to different groups, and in some ways trying to get them on the same page on some social issues. I think this is quality short form platform building. And it's original, it's thought-provoking, it's related to current events. Another example here is someone named Lisa Deem, who we follow on Twitter, and I see her tweets quite a bit. She's a great example of somebody who's really expressing her personality well in her platforms, in her shorter form media. She's done advanced, I think, doctoral studies in medieval mystics, has a book out about the spirituality of maps, that is, maps from the Middle Ages specifically, I think. That's a great example of X plus Y personality on on someone's platform. And so here's an example of a tweet that she's tweeting, also timely and somewhat political. This is a medieval or a Renaissance piece of art. And this is her kind of connecting to, lots of the current discussions about refugees and immigrants and seeking refuge. And this is her particular knowledge that's coming out about medieval and Renaissance spirituality and the stories behind it. The story of a palm tree bending over so that the fleeing Holy Family can take its fruit. That's enriching content. That's something that I had no idea about. It's something that most of our audience is probably learning something from. It's got a beautiful and eye-catching image. It's timely. Great example of short form, quality platform that expresses personality. So with all the short form stuff, though, you don't want to neglect longer form stuff. So I'm going to use Marilyn McIntyre as an example here of someone whose longer form platform online is just excellent. So for the month of December, for the season of Advent, she wrote a series of posts called Adverbs for Advent. And she posted literally every day a blog of, I don't know, it's 600 to 800 words, 600 to 900 words. So this is part of her writing discipline and part of her personality of focusing on spirituality and language. So a particular part of speech, and even connecting with her most recent book, Word by Word, which is a book about exploring spirituality of language, of particular words. So her writing in the month of Advent was a post every day, and that gave her something to share on her social media, on her shorter form, and it really just shows off her writing. So I think that's a great example of longer form quality, and this is something that you know, if you're starting out with your platform, maybe you don't want to post a blog post every day. Maybe you're too busy or you're too tired for that. That's fine. Maybe you feel like you're posting these things and people aren't reading them. You might get only 1 or 2 comments. You might get no comments. If you're tracking views, you might not get very many views. It's important to still be posting those quality things, because you never know when someone new is going to stumble upon your blog or your website, when a publisher that's looking at your platform is going to go back and see what kind of quality stuff are they writing. How can we get a sense of what their actual skill and their voice as a writer is? You want that collection, you want that repository of material that's visible, that's discoverable. Let's talk a little about consistency. What I recommend for people who are starting out, starting from scratch, in longer form, I recommend that you're posting at least once a week, at least weekly. You want your audience, whoever they are, to be able to read something substantial from you, something thoughtful from you, at least once a week. Doesn't necessarily have to be the same day, although if you can, make some sort of memo for that, if you can make some sort of identity around that, great. But I would say at least once a week. And then shorter form, I would recommend at least once a day. And honestly, I think several times a day, whether that's clustered or spread out throughout the day. When I first started working in online marketing, the big question was, how much is too much? Is 3 posts a day, is 3 tweets a day too much? Am I going to annoy my audience if I'm posting, a few times in an hour? In my experience, my sense of the landscape is that oversharing is not as much of a concern as it used to be, again, so long as you're sharing quality stuff. So if your Twitter feed is full of auto posts that say, I just posted a picture on Facebook, because you've got something triggered to tweet every time you post something on Facebook, and it tweets out 29 posts about that, about images you just shared on Facebook, Absolutely not. That's a downward spiral there. That's not what you want. But those quality posts on shorter form, at least once a day, and honestly, I think more than that. So a major concern, especially for more introverted people that are building their platform, is getting exhausted, becoming exhausted, not having enough time to do it. They feel really intimidated by this mandate to post all the time. So one thing that you might see recommended in a lot of places that I think can be your friend for this is an app called Hootsuite, which, as it says, is a social media dashboard. And what that does, it kind of works almost as a sort of futuristic, well, maybe it's not futuristic anymore, control screen. It's like a master control screen that lets you line up all your social media on the screen, see posts on Facebook and Twitter and whatever other media you've got going on. And most importantly, for the purposes of consistency, it lets you schedule things. Now, Facebook has a great built-in scheduling app. Twitter kind of experimented with something called the Twitter dashboard. I logged onto it yesterday and just saw that they are ending at the end of January. So as of tomorrow, that is no more. So Hootsuite is what I used to schedule tweets on Twitter. You can also use it to schedule on Facebook. I think it's easier to schedule directly through Facebook that way. But the point here is you want a way to schedule stuff. So if you're starting out and saying, honestly, I have no idea how I'm going to remember or find the energy or find the time to tweet every day or post on Facebook every day, you can start with something like Hootsuite. You can schedule a time at the beginning of the week or the middle of the week when you're going to take care of your short form posts, or at least make sure that you've got something every day for the rest of the week. I think not only is that a good habit, that is, I think, a good way to kind of overcome that psychological barrier of the blank canvas of what am I going to do on Wednesday? What if I forget? I'm really busy on Thursday. I'm not going to have time. That's a way to take care of it. So whether that means pulling some quotes from your longer form post and tweeting those out or posting those on Facebook with a link, you want to make sure you've got a link. That's great. Whether it's pulling or posting some quotes, maybe on some images, which is something I know that Brian talks about. Whether it's, scheduling some of those posts every day, that's a good kind of base to set for yourself to get to posting every day if you're intimidated by that. So I think you've got to be aware, though, with this, if you're starting out, you've really got to make sure that you don't become a social media zombie. And as somebody that works on social media, I know how easy that is. It's easy to log on to Twitter or Facebook and just kind of, fall into this endless scroll where you're not really creating content, you're not really interacting, you're just kind of consuming from all these different angles, from all these different voices, all sorts of content. It's sort of a content overload, and it kind of gives you some glazed over zombie eyes. And I think it really kind of dulls the mind a little bit. So I think it's really important for anyone I think really for anyone in modern culture today, but maybe I don't want to go down that rabbit trail. For someone whose job it is or whose work it is that involves, being active on social media and building a platform, I think it's really important to limit and to schedule your time on social media. That makes you more productive. It makes you a lot less susceptible to the sort of stultifying effect, that lots of people write about, where we're kind of mushing our brains out. So I really recommend with consistency that you schedule a time, maybe a couple times a day, whatever, but you limit your time that you're spending on social media so that you're fresher, so that your quality is high, and so that you're not overwhelmed by it, you're not exhausted by it at the end of the day. So we've talked about Personality, we've talked about quality, we've talked about simplicity, visibility, and we've now talked about consistency. Now we're going to talk about visibility. One of the major reasons that you've got to be consistent with your platform is you need to be visible. And one of the first things for that is you've got to be visible to bots. This is part of SEO, and it's not really something I'm going to delve really deep into. But if you want good Google search ranks, which is kind of the linchpin for visibility, you've got to be consistent. The Google bots are scurrying around the internet, whatever they do. And if your platform is not consistent, they don't have content to grab onto and kind of pull to the top of the search ranking. So consistency leads to visibility in search fields, in all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And then, of course, the other element of visibility, and I think the more important one, but you've got to have visibility to Google if you want to be visibility to humans. Anyway, the second element of visibility is visibility to humans. So what happens when somebody Googles you and lands on your blog? You want fresh content so that they come back. You don't want them to show up and see that you haven't posted on your blog in a couple months. You don't want them to find you on Twitter and realize that you only come out of your shell, once every 3 weeks to tweet a kind of obscure tweet that no one really understands. To be visible to human beings on social media and on blogs and websites, you've got to have that consistency as well. So another really important element for visibility, and I've got to ask your forgiveness here, as someone who used to be an English teacher and someone really averse to jargon. This is a word that kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It's really jargony. It's kind of an awkward word. So excuse me, we'll kind of get the black out of the way. But something really important for the visibility of your platform is connecting with influencers. That word influencers, like I said, it's jargony, it's awkward, but it is really vital in building and expanding your platform. You want to find those people that can spread the word about you to more and more people. This is where you really want to take advantage of the viral capacity for social media, of that exponential capacity. And you want to be connecting to people that other people know about, right? So again, this is one reason why I really recommend Twitter as a place to start, because it allows you to engage with big players in the field, big names, big authors that tons and tons of people are following. A retweet from somebody like Rachel Held Evans, a tag, from somebody like Shauna Niequist can really put you in front of a lot of other people. One thing that's really important to not do on social media is go fishing for stuff like that. You don't want to be harassing people and annoying them and make them think that you're just fishing for a compliment, you're fishing for attention or something like that. This is where quality really comes in, and even the consistency as well. You want bigger name people with big networks and big platforms already to be able to find you. And when they find you and connect with you, to see the quality and the originality and the personality behind your thought and your writing. If you can get somebody like that in your corner in online networks, that is really key for getting visibility. It can also be really important when you are pitching a book and talking with acquisitions editors. If you have a relationship with people, and sometimes you build that relationship through social media, sometimes you start with a personal relationship and that develops on social media. But if you have that relationship and you can bring that to an acquisitions editor, and say, hey, so-and-so is really going to be able to push this on social media, or so-and-so is willing to write a foreword for my book, or they might be willing to. That's a big asset to have, those influencers. So I want to show you guys an example of something that we do at Erdmans, where we interact with influencers. This isn't really so much in the spirituality side of what we do. This is the easiest example is to grab from the theology side. So recently, and this is January 12th, so only a couple of weeks ago, we had a post on our blog from a book by Helmut Thielicke, who was a German theologian from the 20th century. These are the stats. So you can see the stats from our tweet. This was a ho-hum tweet for us. Reached about 1,000 people, 27 people engaged with it for a 2.5 engagement rate. Kind of a ho-hum tweet for us, right? Not a lot of eyeballs saw it. Some did. But this is part of the consistency of our content and bringing in our longer form stuff onto our shorter form media. So the next day, though, the Gospel Coalition, which has a huge online following, also posted something from this same book by Helmut Thielicke. And so, we just tweeted it and we tagged them here. And you can see the amplification that brought for us for content from our book and from a tweet on our channel. It amplified from 1,000 people up to 11,000 people. That's 1,000%, right? So the engagement didn't quite, follow that expansion, but it sure got in front of a lot more eyeballs because we were interacting with an influencer. The Gospel Coalition is very influential among theological men, certain type of theological nerd online. And so that's the sort of thing that you're going to be looking to do in your interactions, in natural interactions with people, in your social media and in your platform. There are tons of ways to do that. There are tons of ways not to do that. Some of this is learning as you go. But if you can develop those relationships with influencers, if you can have conversations with them, that really helps. So I see that there's a question here. What do you recommend? This is from John. What do you recommend for authors like me who've done many of these things for a long time with limited success? More broadly, is the sheer volume of social media noise making it so that many platform strategies no longer work? I feel that. It is true, I think, that there is more social media noise. And that does make it harder for newer players to kind of be visible without some sort of break. So some of what this comes down to is slow buildup, and some of it is getting a lucky break. I think I want to connect this a little bit to two elements of what we were just talking about. One is consistency. Even if you feel like your content isn't getting in front of a lot of eyeballs, you still have to be consistent because you never know who's going to stumble upon your work, and you want that consistency to be there so that they're seeing new content from you, and so that they're seeing quality content from you. I think the other thing is influencers can be really important here. And so one thing that you want to do is find other people that are working in your area. Find people that are writing and thinking about things that relate with your content, and try to be in conversation with them. Whether that means replying to tweets or Facebook posts, whether that means asking questions of people like that. Sometimes that means, if you've got an earnest question and something that delves kind of deeply, something that you want to ask them about. Sometimes that means sending an email to somebody that you admire, that's thinking well and doing good work. Especially in spirituality, authors can be accessible and they want to talk with their audience. So being in conversation with people like that can really help. It's not a magic bullet. You've got to be, really careful that it doesn't look like you're fishing for things. But if you're having good conversations with people, and sometimes it's, fans and followers of other people, that's a good way to kind of cut through some of that noise and establish a platform for some of your work as well. I hope that's helpful. We may be able to get into some of those questions in more detail.
Hey, Philip, do you mind if I add a couple of things to that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So first of all, John, I think that's an excellent question and quite frankly, very timely. What my own experience has been, as well as talking with some other authors, is that since around the time of the election in particular, social media has been extremely noisy, to your point. And, there's so much political oriented posts, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or, any other social media channel, that it has been increasingly hard to rise up above the noise. So hopefully that's something that will eventually fade away. Kind of given the trajectory within our political environment, I can't tell you if and when, but as a person who depends on social media quite a lot, I really hope it's the case. Second thing I would say is, even without that political intrusion going on, I think, part of the bad news around the saturation of social media more generally is that you have to advertise. The percentage of your fans who will see posts to your page is very small, unless you promote the posts or you do, ongoing advertising. So, bad news, it's becoming a pay to play kind of a thing, a pay to get known. Good news is that within Facebook, as an example, if you do advertising, it allows you to be very targeted, to find the audience that best fits. So I'll leave it at that. We'll talk more about that in the presentation I'll be giving on Thursday about a tactical guide to Facebook marketing. So let me turn it back to you, Philip.
Yeah, great. Thanks for adding both of those. Those are certainly truths that we've found in our work at Erdmann's, both of those actually. So yeah, at Erdmann's, when I came on a couple of years ago, honestly, we didn't really spend any money on social media marketing or social media advertising specifically. And it's a regular part of what we do now. If we have good original content, like a podcast interview or a video interview, we want to make sure people see it. We don't kind of leave it up to chance. We really kind of push that out there to people. So yeah, that's part of the bad news. I think that is. But on the other hand, you get a big return on social media advertising. And this is I think one asset that Facebook has even over Twitter is that not only can you get targeting, but you get a big return on your investment. And you can start with $5 or $10 or $20. So I know that's got to be tough to do if you're, trying to get published and you don't have, royalties or advances coming in yet. But that is a real tool that's becoming more and more of a necessity. And that's something that we in the industry, on the business side, are also having to figure out as well. So I can say that I feel your pain, and hopefully some of these strategies are helpful. So I want to go into a couple of examples about how to build a platform, how not to build a platform, and I want to start with how not to build a platform, because I didn't want to throw anybody under the bus. I'm going to feature myself on how not to build a platform, because I'm not trying to build a platform, but I have a pretty bad one, which is fine. It's fine with me, but I'm not trying to publish a book. So what happens when you Google Philip Zoutendam? I don't recommend doing it, but you can, whatever. Some stuff shows up. I definitely exist online. But what you find is a couple of different short-lived columns on the Erdman's blog. Not a whole lot of consistency there. You find some amateur beer and food journalism, which was fun to write, but not particularly impressive. You find some scattered reviews of books on sundry topics, stretching all the way back to 2009. You find a few news clippings about Habitat for Humanity in West Michigan, where I used to work. And, oh yeah, there's a blog where I haven't posted any original content in more than 2 years. This is not a good platform. It's scattered, it's inconsistent. It doesn't establish any sort of real personality, I think. If I were trying to pitch a book to a publisher, I think they'd be real confused. So wait, is your thing beer? Is it food? Is it nonprofits? Is it fiction books? Is it nonfiction books? Is it poetry? It's kind of a scattershot platform, and that's ultimately a pretty weak platform. It doesn't really fit consistency. It doesn't really fit personality. It's kind of lacking in quality, especially in the beer and food journalism. And you don't find, as I mentioned, consistent themes or even consistent venues for writing. And you don't even find something like a Twitter handle. I deleted my Twitter handle last year because I didn't use it. And I was so tired of Twitter by the time I went home at the end of the day that I said, I get enough Twitter during the day. Don't want to be a zombie, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm a great example of how not to build a platform. I have nothing compelling to bring to a publisher or to an audience that will invite them to listen to me. And that's fine. My gift and my vocation is not in writing and publishing and producing content and publishing books. But if you're aiming to build a platform, here's an example that I hope will be helpful to you. This is an author that's one of our up-and-coming authors that we're really excited about. Laura Everett, and her book is Holy Spokes, which is another great example of X plus Y personality. She is a bicycle commuter, has a great story about how she kind of got into that accidentally. She's a pastor, and in fact, she's the executive director of the Massachusetts Council of Churches. She lives in Boston, and she's done a great job building her platform over the last few years, so that when she brought her manuscript to us, we said, great, we have a great sense of who you are and what you have to say and how people are going to listen to what you're saying. And we have a lot of hopes for when you publish this book, you're going to have a good platform to share the news about that with other people. So what happens when you Google Laura Everett? Very different story from what happens when you Google me. When you Google Laura Everett, you find timely tweets right there at the top. That's something that Google just does automatically in her case. They figure, oh, she's got an active Twitter. She got very active Twitter. We're going to host some of those tweets at the top. So immediately there's clickable content right there in a recognizable medium where people are real likely to just flock right to that. You find a shiny new and on-theme website. It's consistent with her personality. It's got a lot of bicycle cycling themed images and content. You find professional information that establishes her credibility and her authority. She's got some. Well, this ties into the next point. She's got articles in various well-respected publications like the Christian Century, Faith and Leadership, Sojourners. I think she's published for them. Because she has this kind of professional platform of being, with the Massachusetts Council of Churches, and because she's got this personality, she's already got articles, that she's got in these publications, which, gives her more visibility for her book, more visibility, in acquisitions, negotiations. She's got consistent handles. By that I mean her the names of her accounts on Twitter and Instagram are consistent and even kind of witty. She goes by @Rev Everett across multiple social media. So here's some great examples of posts from her. She's very active on social justice issues, and so most of her tweets in the last week have been very political, very posts about being active in protest movements and things like this. But you can see that even when she's doing things like that, she's incorporating her personality. You can see that she's on her bike here in this protest march. She's not on foot, she's on her bike. That's part of her personality and who she is. Even when she's talking about racism and racial profiling, she's got an interesting angle on that. She's talking about racial profiling of cyclists. Same on Instagram. She went to Houston. She posted some posts about touring Houston on a bike and how that actually wasn't a very bike-friendly city in some ways. Another post or another theme that actually shows up on Instagram quite a bit for her are these ghost bike liturgies that she leads in Boston for cyclists that have been killed, on their bikes. So that's not a gimmick. That's actually a very serious part of her pastoral ministry. And so her social media is where she shares about that and invites other people into that. That's a great expression of personality. So there's personality, there's simplicity, quality, consistency, and ultimately a lot of visibility. So with Laura Everett, I think she's a great example of what a publisher like Erdman's is looking for. She doesn't have the following that Rachel Held Evans does. It's not, into the tens of thousands and close to 100,000 or whatever it is. I think her Twitter following is 8,000, or maybe it's 4,000. It's in the thousands, but it's not massive. But she's got a big following, and it's increasing, and she's talking to a lot of people. That's what a smaller publisher looks for. You don't have to have this huge platform starting out. It doesn't even need to be that big. But as long as you've got some of these elements going on for you and you're visible, publishers like Erdman's might look and say, okay, if you're a talented writer and you've got something interesting to say and you're building this platform in the right ways, we're going to take a look at you. You don't have to have 100,000 followers. You don't have to have high profile articles across the web. But you've got to have something, and you've got to be building on it. I see there's a question here about what if you're on Facebook and Twitter, which is great. Lots of people, even if you're starting from scratch, maybe you're doing both. What are the pros and cons of being on both? And do you recommend cross-posting? I'll tackle the last one first. And I would say cross-posting is fine, but there are a couple of pitfalls that you want to watch out for. You don't want Facebook posting to your Twitter account, and you don't want Twitter posting to your Facebook account. I think it's important to post, even if it's the same content on both media, post in a way that's organic to that medium. Because it's easy to tell when someone's just got an auto, they've got a machine doing it or a robot doing it for them. And the way that those media interpret and shape your content is different, and you're going to kind of learn how each medium treats certain content, and you want to be able to take advantage of that, right? So Facebook automatically grabs images and captions. You want to shape that when you're posting on Facebook. You don't want to just throw a link up there and click submit or click publish. You want to be working specifically on Facebook to make that look as good as it can and appeal as much as it can on Facebook, and likewise on Twitter. You want to be tagging people. You want to be using hashtags on Twitter. Hashtags they haven't really picked up as much on Facebook as I think Facebook was hoping, but you want to be using that medium, using the strengths that it has for that particular medium. That's not to say that if you say publish a blog, as part of your longer form content, that you shouldn't share that on both Facebook and Twitter, or even that you wouldn't use some of the same captioning on that. And in fact, I think it's important that if you're publishing longer form content and you're comfortable using both Facebook and Twitter, which plenty of people are, that you are sharing on both of those media and that you're keeping up with the conversation on both of those. Twitter, as I mentioned, one of the huge pros of that is accessibility to influencers. Facebook does a little bit better with multimedia stuff in some ways, YouTube videos, uploading video directly, using Twitter media content as well. So I think it's great to have both, and I think that honestly, it's probably something that you aim for as you continue to build your platform. But make sure that you're treating each medium as a distinct thing, and using it to its full capacity instead of, using a robot to kind of manufacture content on both that might not translate. Things might get lost in translation. So, any other questions from the audience about building a platform from scratch?
Let me go ahead and ask you one, Philip, if I might. Typically, when an author launches a book, oftentimes there's a book publicist involved, and either the author or the publisher will pay for that service. And typically what the book publicist will do is reach out to, as you said, influencers, whether it's bloggers or journalists or online or in print magazines, things like that. How much do you see that shifting? And would you recommend that an author spend their money there or directly reaching out to the audience themselves, and spending their own money in terms of promotion there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I think if you've got the resources for both, you probably want to do both. A publicist can be a huge asset, and especially for new authors, often, a big part of what you're paying for in publicity is connections. People that know the gatekeepers, that can get your book in front of, people that are still gatekeepers at journals that do reviews, or people that might write forewords, or people that are going to get you on, local media. For many different kinds of books, that's still a huge asset. But what I have seen is that, I don't know, if your publicist can't necessarily play with the big dogs, if they don't have great connections, maybe your resources are, better spent on, some social media advertising. Some of this may have to do with the particular content of an author's book, or, what they're trying to broadcast. If it's, something that's real complex and, needs someone to take a longer look at it, sometimes journals, through publicity and getting good reviews, that's really important because people are taking a longer, more sustained look at a book. But if you've got something like The Spirituality of Wine, that's something that you can do a lot of marketing yourself on, in finding the right people and targeting on Facebook advertising or Twitter ads, or finding the right influencers on that. So I guess I would recommend some combination. If you or your publisher can afford a publicist that has great connections, that shouldn't be overlooked. But I think there is the expectation that authors will do more themselves on social media, and also that you can't go without social media in most cases, especially if you're a new name. You've got to be visible out there on social media.
So one last question, Philip. When one of your acquisition editors comes to you with a new author that they're considering bringing in for a new book, maybe it's a first-time book, what are the things that you what are the things you look for first? in assessing their platform?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I do is I punch their name into Google, and I see what comes up. And a lot of what I mentioned in the presentation, those come from, you know, the checklist more or less that I've got. Do they have a website? Someone go to learn about this person in a stable form, in more than just the little Twitter bio, you know, in more than kind of, you know, sifting through social media posts. Where can I go find out about this person, and how good does that website look? If it looks like it was created, you know, way back when I was in high school using Alta Vista or something like that, that's not a good sign to me. I look for a modern website or blog where it's going to be the first thing ideally on a Google search, and then I go to you know, those 3 short form social media platforms that I mentioned: Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I really want to find them on at least one of those media, and I want to find them posting regularly and not just sporadically. So the first thing I look at is not how many followers do they have, how many people are interacting with them, because I think, you know, that can be built and that will be built up over time. I look to see the quality and consistency of the content that they're publishing. So, you know, we had one author that we worked with last year who actually published a number of books with us. This person was a great author, but their Twitter account was mostly them sharing links to online petitions, you know, for very regional issues. And that was not a good sign. Now, because they had already published with us, this was more of a polishing their platform than a, you know, deciding whether we were going to acquire their book or not. But if I found that in a new author, where all they were posting, you know, was kind of auto share stuff in a really limited way that wasn't related at all to their personality, the personality of their book or their writing, that's kind of a red flag for me. So I like to see consistent and quality content, even if you don't have the largest following. So.
Great. Well, Philip, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate all of your wisdom and insight and experience. I'm sure that this has been very helpful to our audience.